I really want to talk about this little clip here because, oh god, it just rubbed me up the wrong way. It just pissed me off. Okay, the Majority Report. I think this is in the context of their video about Ethan Klein and the Hassan Twitch drama, and oh god, it just really rubbed me the wrong way. Oh,
would it justify it if there were gold under there? Who cares if Hezbollah has money? They're a political party in a different country. I mean, you can call them a terrorist organization.
What she's referring to is the IDF targeted a building in, I think it was in Beirut, that had Hezbollah hoarding money underneath it. And the problem is that Hezbollah is not just, it's not just they're a political party with fucking PAC money. Okay, that's not the issue. The issue is that Hezbollah's money is used to engage in activity that they are not legally allowed to engage in, even by Lebanese standards. They're not supposed to be an armed organization. The armed organization of Lebanon is supposed to be the Lebanese army. That's what they're supposed to be. Hezbollah is a criminal organization, even by Lebanese standards. They're not supposed to be armed. They're not supposed to be raising money to get more arms. Not to mention the fact that they're also drug traffickers. They are engaged in illicit drug trafficking with South American countries. They're also sex traffickers because in part of them helping Assad stay in power in Syria, which they did, they contributed to producing that Syrian refugee crisis. A lot of those Syrian refugees ended up in Lebanon. A lot of them ended up in Hezbollah territory because the border between Syria and Lebanon is near the Bekaa Valley, which is Hezbollah territory. So with a bunch of vulnerable Syrian refugees that some Hezbollah helped to create, they took a lot of those refugees and made them into sex slaves. They opened brothels in Lebanon. And this was caught not long ago. They caught I think it was the biggest sex trafficking operation in Lebanese history. And two of the people at the head of it were Hezbollah, high-ranking Hezbollah officials. So, I don't know, to say they're a political party that has funds, it's so ignorant. It's so bad. It's mental. Anyway.
I mean, you can call them a terrorist organization. They're a resistance organization towards Israel. And I'm sure if I were to parse through the views of this resistance group as a cozy Westerner here in Brooklyn, that I would find many of their views distasteful. Perhaps they'd have an opportunity to update potentially retrograde social views as a political party in Lebanon if they weren't worried about Israel expanding their territory into Lebanon.
A belligerent neighbor that
and bombing,
regularly invades them.
Yeah.
So there's just so many different points to. It's like the concentration of bullshit is. So the first thing she said was that it's easy to condemn some of their worst excesses and their distasteful behavior as a cozy Westerner, which, it's ironic that she's saying that because, again, it's cozy and Western of her to say that because from her perspective, they fight with Israel, okay? So we don't need to hold them to the same kind of standard that you would hold, say, the Republican Party for their views, right? Because they're fighting with Israel. But that just means that, It's her way of saying that they basically get a free rein to do all the crazy shit that they want to do in that country and in other countries because they occasionally fire off pot shots at Israel. And again, that's apparently acceptable because Hezbollah needs to be there because otherwise, Hezbollah's behavior is because of fear of Israeli expansion into Lebanon. It's so dumb in so many ways. Hezbollah is not there because they genuinely believe that had they stopped resisting, then Israel would just invade the south and settle it. It doesn't make any sense. Why did Israel leave Lebanon in the year 2000? They left. They unilaterally withdrew from the country. They were there for 18 years. Do you know how many settlements they built in that time? None. They did not try to settle in southern Lebanon. They didn't do that. They didn't even have to kick settlers out of their little shitty houses and bring them back because there weren't any there. There was just troops who were there. Why does Israel invade Lebanon? Well, in 1978, the first Israeli invasion of Lebanon was pre-Hezbollah, but that was when the PLO were there. The PLO were in southern Lebanon and they were launching attacks at Israel. The one that pulled Israel into the country was when the PLO went to northern Israel, they infiltrated northern Israel, and they attacked a bus that had like 30 or 40 civilians in it, and they killed them. They just killed I think it was like 38 civilians in a bus. They like to target buses because buses are a lot of people in a small space. You get a high count. It's not been about Lebanese land. I can just give you the breakdown of why this is so ridiculous. When she talks about Hezbollah being a resistance group against Israel, she's referring to something that is definitely true historically. Hezbollah gained their initial growth and their initial reputation off of being seen as the ones who would fight off the Israeli occupiers in Lebanon, because Israel was occupying Lebanon from 82 until 2000. And 82 was around the same time when Hezbollah started launching their first attacks. They became an official organization in about 85. When Israel invaded Lebanon, the problem was that the Shia population in the south was not very well taken care of by the government. So a lot of them became refugees in their own country. They became displaced, and they didn't get the support from the government that they needed. So they were very increasingly isolated and abandoned. So against that backdrop, Hezbollah, with a lot of help from Iran, gets to come in and say, we're the ones who are going to take care of you. We're going to take care of your welfare. We're going to take care of your medical. We're going to take care of rebuilding houses if you lose your house in shelling or in a tank fire or anything. And we're going to be the ones who will fight the soldiers that did this to you. That was their first claim to fame, was doing that. Now, why they were able to get support from Iran is an interesting story, because believe it or not, and this is the thing that these dipshits will never tell you because they don't know, because they're ignorant and they have the confidence to talk about this stuff even though they know fucking nothing about the area they're talking about. Israel was not the only country that had an interest in going into Lebanon. Another country that had an interest in going into Lebanon was Syria. Israel occupied southern Lebanon, about 10% of the land, for about 18 years. Syria occupied Lebanon for 29 years. And Syria did that in part because they wanted to contain the PLO. They wanted to tame the PLO's presence in Lebanon so that they could, because they wanted to be the ones who were at the head of the pan-Arab fucking resistance or whatever. The Assads had always had this kind of underlying interest in the idea of a greater Syria. I think there was one point when Hafez al-Assad in the 70s literally said that the Lebanese and the Syrians were one people. They were one nation, one state. Yeah. So there's been an imperial interest. The idea of greater Syria was always a thing at the back of Hafez al-Assad's mind. And also they were there under the guise of restoring stability. But also Syria they've had an interest in Lebanon. They don't like the fact that Lebanon was run by Christians who were pro-Western at the time. They didn't like that. They wanted Lebanon to be more in line with the sort of pan-Arab ideals of Syria and the rest of the other countries. So Syria occupied Lebanon for 29 years. And Syria was also allied or friendly with the Ayatollah. So when the Iranian Revolution happens and Iran completely switches their ideology and their position in the international stage, they see an opportunity to get a presence in a country like Lebanon that they didn't otherwise have access to, because there's a Shia population in Lebanon and they need help. So Syria allows Iran to send 1,500 IRGC troops into the country. And that was in 82, around that time. So with help from Syria to benefit for their regional interests, Iran gets to pursue their interests in the region by building up Hezbollah. And that's how Hezbollah got their reputation. Not only, by the way, Hezbollah didn't just fight with Israel in the 80s. They fought with the IDF a lot. They also fought with other Shias. They also fought with other Shiite Muslims. The Amal movement was the other movement in Lebanon that Hezbollah fought with. They literally fought with them in Beirut. They had street fights with them. And then that's how Hezbollah initially gained control over the south of Beirut, over Dahia. That's how they got control over Dahia. They fought with other local, much more local, not backed by Iran, Shia groups. They also fought with leftists. because their whole idea was to spread the Islamic revolution to Lebanon. They didn't like leftists. They killed leftists. Even communist websites. There was one communist website I was reading that now supports Hezbollah because communists are, beggars can't be choosers anymore, follow the Soviet Union. They murdered communists in the 80s as well. They used to chant, no, not the West, not socialism, we want Islam. That was one of their chants, paraphrasing from the Arabic, but that was one of their chants. So when they've got this level of control over South Lebanon, largely built off of fighting Israel, but also built off of crushing internal opposition and having the help of Syria and Iran, they're a massive thorn in the side of the Israeli occupation in the south. Eventually, in 2000, Israel agrees to withdraw. They withdraw to the point that, the UN draws out a blue line. They say, this is where the border should be. This is where you need to pull back from. They honor that blue line so strictly that they even have to take a fence in one of the villages in northern Israel and pull it back just a few meters because it was just touching slightly over the border. It was in the middle of a field. But they just pulled it back just to religiously stick to this blue line. But there was a problem now because after Israel left, the only occupier left in the country was Syria. And Hezbollah are in an issue right now because by this time, the other armed factions of Lebanon were supposed to be disarming, or they'd already been disarmed. The only group that didn't get disarmed was Hezbollah. And they didn't have a reason to be armed anymore because the Israelis left. So, in order to keep up their resistance, so as it's called, they just came up with arbitrary reasons. One was that they claimed sovereignty over the Sheba farms, this little 15 square mile patch in the Golan Heights, which is officially part of Syria, but had, I think it was 3 Lebanese people from the town of Sheba had land deeds there. And they used the farms before it was occupied. There's this little bit of land that Syria officially owns, but some Syrian officials will say that it belongs to Lebanon, and the Lebanese will say that it's theirs. Well, the ones who care about it. Most Lebanese people, before this point, didn't even know about the Sheba farms or care that much about them. But they'll say that this is their reason to keep fighting with Israel, this little patch of land. And the international community says, no, it's not part of Lebanon, it's part of Syria. Syria has never, to this day, officially transferred over their claim of the Sheba farms to Lebanon. Assad has literally said he won't do it, as late as 2011. But there's this one little thing, which should be part of Lebanon eventually, that they grasp onto. How big is the farms? It's 15 square miles. About that. It's not much. It's really not much. As for Lebanon's claim to it, the international community has said that if you want to get the Sheba farms as part of Lebanon, that's going to be in line with Resolution 242. That would mean that the Lebanese government would have to negotiate it with Syria and with Israel in exchange for peace. Israel occupies the Golan Heights. Syria doesn't want to make peace with Israel. Lebanon isn't making peace with Israel. And until that changes, then Israel's not going to give up the Golan Heights. They're probably never going to give up most of it. But if Syria and Lebanon come forward and say that they're ready to make peace with Israel in exchange for the land that was captured in the Six-Day War, then that would put Israel on the back foot internationally. That would make them look really bad. But that hasn't happened. The problem is that Hezbollah has no claim to the Sheba farms. They don't have any claim to it. They're not the Lebanese government. So no one internationally recognizes their right to fight over this little patch of land that most people in Lebanon don't give a shit about. Were the Golan Heights Lebanese? No, they were Syrian. So that's one of their excuses. And their other excuse for keeping up the resistance is that throughout the occupation of Israel, of southern Lebanon, Israel took a few Hezbollah fighters, Lebanese militants, prisoner in Israel. So once they pulled out in 2000, it was a unilateral withdrawal. They didn't talk to anyone. They didn't negotiate with anyone. They just pulled out. So they didn't give the prisoners back to Lebanon because they didn't trust Hezbollah to keep them in jail. They would probably just release them and let them fight again. So Hezbollah said that we still need to get our soldiers back. That was actually their big claim. That was what they So for the next 6 years, Hezbollah just keeps on launching these border raids into Israel where they would kill and kidnap soldiers, Israeli soldiers. And they would say, we're going to do this because we want to do like a Gilad Shalit. We want to swap. We want to free the Lebanese hostages of Israel, right? The prisoners, the fighters who were taken prisoner by Israel. Do you know how many prisoners Israel had at the time from Lebanon? How many Lebanese prisoners were in Israel at the time Hezbollah was making this grand claim to keep on fighting with the country that had just withdrawn from them? 2. They had 2 prisoners. 2 prisoners who, by the way, were there because they were fighters. They were literally like illegitimate, not recognized by anyone in the international community, militants. And there was no guarantee that Hezbollah would ever keep them jailed. They would probably just let them get back to fighting. So 2 prisoners. And that was Hezbollah's impetus for keeping their arms. They were so aggressive about this that they would literally threaten to kill people who tried to disarm them, as in like the Lebanese government. So they run into another problem. They run into another problem in 2005 when the Syrian occupiers of Lebanon are kicked out. There's a huge nonviolent protest in 2005 called the Cedar Revolution. It's the first time ever, actually, a nonviolent protest removes a governing force from an Arab or Middle Eastern country. So they forced the Syrians to withdraw. In the midst of all that, the Lebanese prime minister, who spearheads in large part the opposition to Syrian occupation, Rafiq Hariri, a more pro-Western guy, is assassinated. His car blows up. And around the same time, a bunch of other anti-Syrian activists, journalists, NGO types, they're assassinated as well, largely in car bombings. One of them was actually the former head of the Communist Party. And to this day, most of these killings are unsolved. Most of them were against the Syrian occupation. So they were either killed by people who supported who were Syrian, or people who supported the Syrian occupation, the biggest group of which was Hezbollah. So most people in Lebanon blame Hezbollah for most of these killings. And eventually, Rafiq Hariri, because he was a prime minister, he was a very big figure, there was a proper investigation into his death. And they found out that 4 Hezbollah members were culpable. So they indicted these 4 members, but they indicted them in absentia because, unfortunately, although they had pretty good evidence that Hezbollah had killed this Lebanese prime minister, they couldn't do anything about it because Hezbollah still had their arms. They were still better armed than the Lebanese army. So this is Nasrallah talking about it when they're being tried in absentia.
We then decided to proceed to trial in absentia.
يخطئ من يتصور
Anyone who believes they can just issue a warrant and think that we would allow them to arrest even one of our fighters is utterly mistaken. We would chop off the hand of anyone who dares touch one of our fighters.
إلى أي واحد منهم فتقطع.
So by this point, Hezbollah's reputation as a resistance group helping us against the Israeli occupier is starting to lose its appeal because the Israeli occupier is gone and they're terrorizing the Lebanese population and basically saying we're going to get away with assassinating a prime minister. So it's funny that Emma says they're a resistance group. They're saving Lebanon from the inevitable Israeli occupation and settling and conquering of the. Meanwhile, people in Lebanon are like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" There's a reason that Hezbollah are only popular amongst the Shiite population in Lebanon now. They are not popular amongst the Sunnis. They're massively unpopular amongst the Sunnis, actually, and they're obviously very unpopular amongst the Christians. They're not that popular amongst the Druze either. I mean, this is why. It's because they're seen as an Iranian-backed proxy that's occupying the country, that basically can operate with impunity because no one has the arms or the political will to deal with them. So after 2005, when Syria leaves, the notion of disarming Hezbollah amongst the Lebanese leadership becomes really, really popular. People want it to happen. They don't think there's any good reason to keep this group armed anymore. And Nasrallah, his approach to that was this. This is him in 2005. We will consider any hand that tries to get our weapons an Israeli hand, and we will chop it off. He has a thing for talking about chopping people's hands off in the name of resistance. TLDR, Hezbollah they're gangsters. They're a cartel working on behalf of the imperial interests of Iran and Syria. And obviously that reputation as a resistance group, it was revitalized a little bit. It was revitalized a little bit in 2006 because one of the Hezbollah kidnappings of Israeli soldiers finally pushed Israel to decide that they were going to invade Lebanon and try to take out Hezbollah for good. Israel massively failed. Hezbollah, they was completely underestimated. They were much more powerful than any Palestinian group Israel had fought with. And out of that, and out of the destruction brought upon Lebanon in that war by Israel, Nasrallah managed to kind of build up his reputation a little bit again. People overstate it, though, I think. I think people overstate how much popularity Hezbollah gained from that war. They did gain quite a lot because they put up such a good fight against Israel compared to what Arabs were used to. But there were still people, especially early on in the war, there were still people who opposed Hezbollah who actually almost welcomed what was happening. People from the March 14th movement, from the Cedar Revolution, people who actually thought that Israel, if they did disarm Hezbollah, they'd actually be doing the country some good. But obviously they failed. Hezbollah gets to wave the flag of resistance once again and say that they're the ones who keep the Israelis out, etc. And then in 2011-12, they murder that reputation of theirs again when they join Assad and help him stay in power in Syria. And then, in large part, contribute to that Syrian refugee crisis. By the way, Assad is in power still, largely because of Hezbollah. It's quite unlikely, I think, maybe debatable, we'll say. It's debatable that they would have survived without Hezbollah. There was the 2008 crisis. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. 2008. 2008, there was a rift between Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. And Hezbollah were in a bit of trouble because I think some of their operations had been shut down by the Americans. That Hezbollah felt like they were a bit on the back foot. So they fucking couped Beirut. They marched into Beirut and fought with people. Some of the people they fought with were the Lebanese socialists. They fought with Lebanese socialists in the streets of Beirut and then started to take control over various financial institutions in Lebanon. And they took control over ports and shit. They couped the country. They did it January 6th, but they succeeded, right? With guns and shit. Yeah. Because anything better than facing accountability. In 2020, because they were storing thousands of tons of ammonium nitrate in a port in Beirut. There was an accident. There was a fire. Jugs of oil, kerosene, hydrochloric acid, fireworks as well. There was a fire, and this fire ignited about 2,000 to 3,000 tons of this ammonium nitrate and caused the Beirut explosion, which killed over 200 people, injured thousands. You can see it happening here. There's the fireworks. There's the explosion, and then the huge... They got lucky as well, by the way. If all of the ammonium nitrate in that hangar had exploded, if all of it had actually managed to explode, then Beirut would just be rubble. The entire city would be gone. They were lucky that only some of it went off. And you think, what's this got to do with Hezbollah? Well, the Lebanese judge who tried to investigate this was basically intimidated into the investigation going nowhere by Hezbollah. Because who else is storing this much explosive material in a port in Beirut? Hezbollah were the ones that basically didn't allow anyone to be held accountable for this incident. This is the shit that they do. And coming back to it, you've got these these absolute morons who don't know any of this, who know they don't know any of this. Just, I guess, using a heuristic because they're like, okay, well, Arab group fights with Israel. Okay, Israel, really bad, colonizer of the region. Arab groups, the noble, indigenous, morally pure population just fighting for survival. Well, if Hezbollah is fighting with Israel, it must be because Israel has an interest in conquering Lebanon, and that's why Hezbollah has to be there, and that's why we'll just tolerate their murdering of thousands or tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of Arabs in Syria, and murdering their political opponents in Lebanon, and murdering leftists in Lebanon, and fucking the country's economy, and engaging in drug cartels and sex trafficking and all the rest of it, turning certain neighborhoods into basically replicas of Iran with the Ayatollah's face everywhere, and fucking like their own version of a morality police checking that the women and the girls are dressed properly. That's all, that's all fair game, because otherwise Lebanon would be conquered by Israel, which is not true. Like, if Hezbollah didn't exist and the Lebanese government was willing to make peace with Israel, then that's what would happen. Just because there are some crazy religious people in Israel who talk about settling Lebanon, that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. It doesn't mean that's what... It doesn't even mean that's like what could even happen now. We know that because back when Israel used to have slightly less crazy leaders, and by that I mean much less crazy leaders, in the 2000s, they left Lebanon. They wanted to leave. They disengaged. It was a popular move as well. It was actually the only promise that Ehud Barak made with regards to the Middle East that he kept. So whilst the Lebanese people, including the Christians, generally have no love for Israel, they're also not shedding that many tears for Hezbollah. Anyway, sorry, that was maybe way too elaborate, but okay.
Bombing the hell out of them. Perhaps they would have that luxury if that were the case.
Well, it's not like Israel's politics are particularly leftish.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I saw that guy.
Notwithstanding.
Did you see that guy Noah Smith on Twitter, who's been one of the biggest liberal Zionist defenders, just the other day discovered that interfaith marriages are illegal in Israel? It's like, we've been saying that.
But, so we'll talk about this. We'll talk about the fact that because marriages in Israel are done by either sheikhs if you're Muslim or by rabbis if you're Jewish, then obviously, like, they don't really allow interfaith or gay marriage and all that shit. And you have to go to a different country. You have to get married in Cyprus or something, and then you can get your marriage recognized in Israel. But they do have civil partnerships, I think, which I think their civil partnerships allow interfaith. I don't think they allow gay marriage yet. But the fact that they're willing to sidestep Hezbollah's regressive policies... Bro, do you think Hezbollah are allowing gay marriages to take place even if they happen in another country? Fuck off. No, if you criticize Hezbollah in Lebanon, chances are they're going to kill you. If you try to investigate the killing of Hariri or the killing of any of these other activists that were killed in the 2000s for opposing the Syrian occupation, yeah, they'll kill you. If you try to make a political move to talk about disarming Hezbollah and consolidating the Lebanese military to a non-partisan military, yeah, they'll kill you. That's what they'll do. They'll kill you. If you try to investigate the drug trafficking, they'll kill you. If you try to investigate the sex trafficking of Syrian refugees, they'll kill you. Or at the very least, they'll intimidate the shit out of you. Lochman Slim was killed for that reason? Yeah, he was. Yeah. I think Lochman Slim was arrested at the airport, wasn't he? Because Hezbollah controlled the airport. Fuck this, man. It's so depressing.
Are illegal in Israel. It's like, we've been saying that for years.
But I know the marriages are recognized if you do it outside of Israel. Yeah, which is still not great, but it's compared to fucking Hezbollah. Okay.
This is the American press for you, which is owned by Zionists. And that's why Zach Beauchamp at Vox is the guy on this same fucking beat.
Jesus, that guy really went to the... Whoa, we pushed a little barrier down there. And what was this summary again? Oh, God. I feel so bad now because it's like, I know that for Palestine, these people will, at least they'll read a bit because there's so much information there about, like, there's so many pamphlets and explainers and brief histories because all these guys fucking deal with his post-it note histories and politics, especially for the Middle East. At least you can do that for Palestine. At least I can imagine these people know roughly what the second intifada was or the first intifada. But for Lebanon, these guys know nothing. It's absolutely nothing. And it leads them to apologize for the most brutish, authoritarian fucking psychos in the region. Oh, God. I mean, even if you're Lebanese and you really hate Israel, why the fuck would you support Hezbollah? Like, Hezbollah's not very good at killing Israelis. You notice they try. It's not for a lack of trying, but they don't have the technology and they don't have and obviously it's not really They know that they don't want to do so much that they would pull Israel into the country, because now we know what happens when Israel comes into the country, because they're a paper tiger, right? They're fucked. But even if you hate Israel, like, you also have to really hate Arabs. You have to hate Syrians. Just so you know, everyone in Syria who's not pro-Assad hates Hezbollah. All of them. It's not just ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whatever. It's everyone who opposes Assad. It's the refugee population, and it's the population inside Syria. It's the refugee population in Lebanon. They all hate Hezbollah. Some Lebanese are too brainwashed and some are too pro-Assad. Well, in Lebanon, I think the Sunnis almost broke 10% approval rating for Hezbollah. Like 10% liked them and the rest opposed after October 7th. So after October 7th, I think some people in Sunnis in Lebanon warmed up to Hezbollah, but most of them still don't like them. Most of them still oppose them. What's this? Cleopatra.
To be complaining about what he's about to complain about in terms of like the racist well that they're swimming in.
The notion that Cleopatra was black is silly. I mean, again, you're allowed to do this in Hollywood because, of course, the only thing that matters is our weird, parochially American perception of what race matters. It's super, super strange. By the way, we actually have sculptures of Cleopatra. It's not as though there's like nothing to indicate what Cleopatra looked like. There's a Roman sculpture.
This is him being mad because a black person played Cleopatra, is that right?
Cleopatra,
Okay,
like the mid-1st century.
First of all,
Pause it.
it's the left that's being parochial, not the guy that can't go on a map and see which continent is Egypt on. Ben. Facts over feelings. Ben Shapiro doesn't understand that,
It's
like,
the north of
yeah.
Africa.
Good job, Bradley.
Is everyone in Africa is black? Is it North Africa? Bro, oh no. The North, there's this whole thing, right? There's this whole thing. It's a massive fucking desert in Africa that separates the sub-Saharan, I gave it away, with the North. And the northern part of Africa is off the Mediterranean and obviously near the Levant, which means, lots of people from different parts of Europe and the Middle East went over there. People came from, historically speaking, Cleopatra was from a Greek dynasty, not even indigenous. Yeah, it's like, so people from Greece, ancient Rome, like the Balkans, southern France, southern Italy, those areas, southern Spain. Kind of like there's a bit of intermingling there between the north and the south. And the people in the north of Africa were also Muslims, a lot of them, from the Levant, as in, like, not black Africans. Okay. Holy shit. Okay.
He doesn't seem to understand that, his own fanciful notions of what Cleopatra looked like. Maybe he saw Elizabeth Taylor at one point play her. But that's informed by your culture. That's informed by what you were fed as a child, as opposed to the geographic location of where she's literally from.
Alias. Oh yeah, because Israel is a good boy who would never expand into other territories, am I right? That's not what I said in the slightest, you fucking idiot. Do you think that just because a country expands into some areas, like the West Bank, that means they have an interest in expanding into every area? Oh god, they're probably going to fucking invade, they're probably going to invade Cyprus next. They're probably going to conquer fucking Saudi Arabia, France. I gotta make sure they're not coming to Scotland.